Hi guys, thank you for joining me again. Today we're going to be discussing negotiations as it's a really important topic for Model UN. So without further ado, let's get started. So what is negotiation? It is a discussion between two or more parties aimed at reaching an agreement with a beneficial outcome for everybody, or at least for you. So a lot of people, the zone of agreement represents what you can say, no, maybe you practice them in your day-to-day life to potentially get to the draft resolution stage. It's all important because then you know who to try and persuade and can't be persuaded. Hi guys, thank you for joining me again. Today we're going to be discussing negotiations as it's a really important topic for Model UN. So without further ado, let's get started. So what is negotiation? It is a discussion between two or more parties aimed at reaching an agreement with a beneficial outcome for everybody, or at least for you. So a lot of people know or have negotiated before, but what we're really going to be focusing on today is the theory behind it, which will help you improve your skills. So in Model UN, negotiation is the method whereby delegates can settle their differences and reach compromises to write a coherent draft resolution or to get a majority of delegates to vote for you. So you're going to be negotiating with people to be able to get your ideas in that draft resolution and voted for. So negotiation is really important and is mainly important in the unmoderated caucuses, which is where you can get up and converse with other people and try to sway them to join your side. So here's some negotiation terms. Firstly is the bottom line, which is the position at which the negotiator will walk away from the negotiation. So the bottom line is your absolute fundamental, you have to have it. You're not going to go below that. The zone of agreement represents the difference between the bottom line of the parties, or also known as where the interests line up. So if there's no overlap with bottom lines of the parties, agreement might not be possible or will be highly unlikely. So zone of agreement is essentially where you have things that you're willing to compromise and let go of if the other party does the same. So if you don't have anything that's the same, then negotiation will be really difficult. So the first thing to know will be the negotiation types. Negotiation of positions is a negotiation strategy which involves holding on to a fixed idea or position of what you want and arguing for it and it alone, regardless of any underlying interests. So it's about claiming instead of creating any value. So when you negotiate over positions, you're seeing everything as a competition and there's a loser or a winner, right? So you get what you want or you don't. And if you are negotiating like this, then you're seeing other people as adversaries instead of someone who you can work with to achieve an ideal outcome. So they insist very strongly on their own position, so obviously creating a my way or the highway attitude, and they're not afraid to apply pressure to make sure they get their own way. But of course, I'm sure from this list, you can see the issues with a negotiation over positions tactic. So as we can see in the white, the pros are that it's very clear, people know what's going on, everyone knows what the goals are, and they can readily say, yes, we accept, or no, we reject that. But obviously there's a lot of cons in the sense that it can be quite intimidating or alienating. You're not really willing to compromise or negotiate, and a lot of the time this can be it can cause people to see you as unapproachable, and you might not be able to get the numbers that you actually need, and ultimately your goal will be unattainable because you're not willing to compromise at all. So negotiation over interests is where there is a focus on the party's actual interests, which is the reasons why you're coming to this negotiation. So to uncover these underlying interests can help negotiators determine whether there's more than one way to satisfy their needs, which can enable an outcome satisfying the interests of both parties. So instead of having a set goal, for example, I have to have 12 chickens on my farm, you're trying to understand why you need those 12 chickens on your farm and finding a solution that can address that reasoning instead of having to actually have those specific 12 chickens. So this approach really focuses on the interests of the parties and emphasizes conflict management and resolution. So instead of focusing on the predetermined intentions and those predetermined ideas of exactly what they want, negotiation over interest really focuses on the problem at hand. And obviously you can see why that this type of negotiation is also known as principled negotiation. So this isn't super clear, but it's a little bit of a comparison between the two types of negotiation tactics. So as you can see in the focus on positions, the man saying, I'm going to need 15% raise, which is something very specific. It's a set thing that he wants. And the lady is saying, there's no way that's in the budget this year. We could do 5%. And he replies, and I'd rather be on the golf course. So it's very, there's no room for compromise at all. He wants that number, and if he doesn't get it, he doesn't want it. So that's what it means by having a negotiation that centers around positions. On the other side, it's focused on interests, and the man says, I'm going to need a 15% raise. Ideally, I'd have a more flexible schedule and a stronger focus on mentoring. So you can see that he's explaining the why, because he probably feels like he's doing a lot of work, needs a bit of a break, needs a bit more money. And the lady saying, we want to keep your experience and institutional knowledge without paying an arm and a leg for it. So as you can see, both of their reasons are out. So it gives rise to a capacity to now start a negotiation. And the black, in case you can't read it, says, principal negotiators concentrate on understanding what will be beneficial to the parties and identifying underlying goals, discovering whether there is common ground. So as you can see, the man wants to stay on, but wants a bit more flexibility and a pay rise. And the lady is understanding of that, but also explaining that, there's no way they can pay so much for it. So that's where that negotiation in the interest sphere comes in, and where you can really start doing some compromise, or I guess arguing and negotiating. This is also really quite good. It can show you the different types of negotiations quite well. So as you can see, this is a typical negotiation, again, like very positions based and quite emotional, which is something we try to avoid in negotiation. And this person is conflating people with the problem, which is what we want to avoid. The person who is negotiating is often just the messenger. They're not the actual person, making the rules or setting those bottom line and the zone of agreement things. So it's important to separate the issue from the person. So as you can see, the woman saying, you've got to be some sort of quack prescribing me all these pills, very emotional. And the man says, well, you're welcome to get a second opinion then. So it's important to not get hung up on emotions, which can create difficulties in communication. And get distracted by the emotional and interpersonal side of the issue instead of the actual important substance at hand. So in the principal negotiation, you can see that they've separated the people from the problem, with the lady saying, I'd really like to keep my daily medication simple. Do you think that is possible? So again, that's giving some scope for the other person to explain his reasons, and then to potentially have a more substantive and productive discussion about it. So to conclude that bit, positions is to be hard on the people and the problem, whereas negotiation on interests is where you're soft on the people, being understanding of them, where they're coming from, but you're being hard on the problem. So you are making sure that you have the reasons of why you're coming in and to get what you want, but based on the why, not the actual specific numbers. So let's have a look at how you can engage in a negotiation over interests. So firstly, obviously, as we've talked about, is to separate the people from the problem. So the issues should be decided on their merits, and you should not let emotions or the opposing party influence you. It's always important to be calm and collected. Second, it's important to focus on the interests rather than the positions. So by focusing on the interests, the parties might see they're not actually as opposed as they thought they were, because you can have different end goals, but if your reasons for those goals are the same, it's a lot easier to come to a compromise. Third, have different options available. So generate a wide range of options. Potentially you can make a pro-con list, do some brainstorming. They're all really excellent ways to get the juices flowing. So doing that before deciding or presenting is really important, because then if you have different options, then you can always have some sort of mutual agreement for one of them, or at least one where you can vote on with the majority in your block. And last is to base the outcome on an objective criteria. So in Model UN, you can refer to past programs that have worked, or you can focus on UN documents and treaties that actually support the idea. And having that sort of factual basis, or that basis that, you can show people this has worked, is really useful. In fact, it's much more useful than basing it on something such as, national interests or power politics, because you want to show people that it's something that is practical instead of something that's just selfishly good for you. So moving on to part 2, these are some of the negotiation skills and tactics. I'm sure these are all things that maybe you practice them in your day-to-day life, but leading up to MIAS, things that you can definitely start thinking about a bit more. So it's really important to have good preparation. Knowing what you want is very important. Knowing why you want them is very important. And knowing what other options you have instead of that one goal, again, very important. It's good to have good communication skills, obviously, and this links a lot with the interpersonal skills, so being able to make connections with other delegates, being relatable and friendly, and being able to communicate easily with somebody without getting into an argument, without getting too upset if something doesn't go your way. So that's really important, and to do that, definitely a lot of patience and emotional control. Active listening is also really important. And this is listening that goes beyond nodding and saying, I'm listening. It's actually understanding what they're saying, taking notes and asking questions based on what they've said. It really shows the other person that you're engaged and you're willing to start a conversation about it. Again, all this links. So emotional intelligence, again, is something that, it all links together. And so being able to recognize the emotions of others and managing your emotional responses and managing other people's emotional responses even is really important. To keep everything just smooth and to try and get people on your side as much as you can. And lastly, obviously, is teamwork, to balance your interests with your allies. You can't always have your way, but within your allies, you'll be fighting for similar ideas, similar resolutions. Again, you'll have a similar why. So even if, that statistic is different, the ultimate execution of the plan is different to what you'd imagined, think about if it does match your why, then it might be something that you're willing to compromise. Could it be conducive to compromise? So these are all the different things that you can think about. We're going to have a look at classifying objectives. This is something that's really important in your mind before going into a negotiation, because if you know these things, then you can be a lot more flexible, and you'll also be very sure of what you're doing, and that you're not accidentally sacrifice something that I shouldn't have done. So having these really clear, written out or thought out is important. So we've got the bottom line. These are non-negotiable, and if these do happen, you aren't following your country's policies. And this often involves the country's most vocal issues and objectives. So these are things that you will not sacrifice, you cannot compromise on. Negotiable are things that are somewhat negotiable. You wouldn't be too happy about losing it, but if you had to, because for somebody else to offer up their compromise, maybe it's worth it. So you need to try and preserve this, but you can change elements of it. So for example, maybe you wanted to initially have a $500 million budget, but one country is saying, oh, well, I think that's not enough, let's move it to 800 billion. So then you need to move things around, but it's doable. So it's not something that's too concerning to sacrifice. And then there's the things in the green, which are things that you can let go. And these are objectives you support, but if they need to be abandoned, that's also fine for you, especially if you get something in return for it. So the next thing to think about is blocks and allies. It's important that you establish some kind of unified block as soon as possible within the conference, because if you make clear to other competitors that this is your group, then it's going to be easier for you to try and get your ideas passed through the block, and for them to potentially get to the draft resolution stage. It's also important because then you know who to try and persuade and who can't be persuaded. Next, part 3 is negotiation troubleshooting. So what happens if negotiations go a little bit wrong? What can you do? So here are the most common challenges. That might be the lack of time. At real United Nations, people negotiate for months about an issue to get it passed. So obviously the fact that we've only got 2 days is definitely a challenge. So you need to be very concise and aware of being a little bit faster and getting things through. Another challenge is dealing with difficult delegates, and that's very possible. Somebody who is taking a positions approach, or somebody who is who is tying emotions to their issues. So these are all things that you need to be able to work out ways to deal with. Again, having different personalities with someone can also cause some conflict that you need to avoid. Not being heard or seen can be a bit of a challenge, and the best way to try and avoid that is to be vocal, to put your placard up to speak in the general speakers list or the moderated caucus. It can sometimes be easy to overlook a delegate, but if you're making yourself heard through speaking up, through participating and joining the different blocks and submitting your ideas to each other, then this should be a challenge that you can avoid. Not being sure who to approach or what to approach with is something that you could overcome through having a lot of really good research, knowing your country's allies, knowing your country's enemies as such, and also obviously knowing what you want to say and what your country's goals are. If there's a more powerful delegate, well, there's not much you can do, but you can always, try to be allies with them, try and get them to take your side of a solution, make them see why your resolution might be stronger, better, etc. There's also issues such as others playing dirty, which isn't really something you can deal with, except maybe to tell the chair, or you can also even rally the other countries against them. And there's always the issue of people not being cooperative. Again, that is something that can be dealt with through good emotional intelligence and being very cooperative and friendly with other people. So here are some key tips, which I sort of had already touched on in the previous slide, but research and knowing the value of time are 2 of the most important things. So if you take away nothing, these are the 2 things that you should know. You must know what you want, and this can only be done with research. If you don't know what you can bring to the table, then it will be very difficult to attempt negotiation. So you need to think about what you can offer them and what you want them to do for you. So here are some of the questions that you can consider. What country they represent? Are they an ally? What problems are they having as a country, or even as delegates? And what resolutions or amendments have they sponsored? And do they align with yours, or could they potentially even be merged with yours? And obviously the most basic, what do they want and what can you offer? Knowing the value of time is very important because, as I said before, it's actually not a lot of time for Monash, and time can definitely influence your negotiation style because you're under a lot of pressure to get things through as fast as you can. But you can use it to your advantage if other people are also having difficulties in getting what they want through to the other people. And the best way to take advantage of that is to be at the conference prepared and knowing who you want to talk to and what you want to talk about. And another tip is to not waste time with delegates who don't want to cooperate or aren't interested. It's okay to walk away from a conversation if you see it going nowhere, no one's willing to negotiate or compromise, there's always other people out there that will be willing to talk to you. So in summary, focus on the similarities between you and other countries. Resolve the differences by focusing on the why instead of the actual positions. And make sure you collaborate. This is just to have fun and to develop some of your skills in talking and negotiating with other people in a MUN-style setting. So at the end of the day, come to Monash and enjoy yourself. Thank you.